Grinding is an essential part of RuneScape and pretty much any MMO ever made, but knowing about the grind and what's ahead doesn't make the process any easier, and that's because there is a bit of deception involved. Whenever you first start playing, you'll get your first few levels relatively fast. You can really feel that progression. You also get a nice palette of training areas. So in those first few levels, you'll be moving from place to place, training the same skill, but at a variety of different places or simply with different materials. But of course, as we all know, the more you progress a skill, the longer it takes to get to the next level. Even with new training methods giving you exponentially increasing amounts of experience, still does little to speed up an ever-slowing rate of progression. To make matters worse, the further you train a skill, the shallower the diversity with training methods you receive, which is where you can really feel the grind hitting you. This is what makes agility and rune crafting so unbearable for most, as instead of being able to explore the game world and set your own path for training and self-discovery, you're stuck running laps in the same area for unbearably low rates of experience. So these two skills essentially have the same gameplay loop, except rune crafting makes things a bit more tedious by involving banking, managing pure essence, and having to constantly keep checking your teleportation charges. Not only that, but where most skills like fishing have AFK variants where you can sacrifice faster experience rates for a more relaxed training method, no such thing exists for agility or rune crafting, making it even more linear than other skills. Well, except for RS3 where there are AFK variants. But still, exploration is a key component to making something feel fun or even an achievement. If you discover an area for yourself and feel in control of your own experience, you have more incentive to spend time wandering rather than grinding. That way, it always feels like there's more out there to explore, and you're rewarded with new areas to train by doing so and maybe even better experience per hour. You won't have to be stuck in the same area literally running laps for what feels like an ever-increasing amount of time. So if we take a look at grinding, especially when skilling, it just kinda sucks, right? I mean, you're stuck doing the same thing for such a long time, and in the case of agility and rune crafting, it can almost feel unbearable like I mentioned before. And maybe even lazy that an entire skill is set in such a small area, so it must be lazy game design, right? Well, although it might feel that way, it does serve a purpose. So while grinding these skills is tough, it serves an important role by accentuating the other aspects of the game you are most likely grinding for, like bosses, achievement diaries, and most importantly, quests. Because if grinding is defined by doing the same thing over and over in a repetitive fashion for the sake of improvement, then pretty much everything in RuneScape can be described as a grind. Because most of RuneScape's quests and how we approach them is usually the same. Whether you're reading a guide or doing the quest blind, there's no doubt a similar pattern. And if you do enough of them back to back, the format becomes more noticeable. Running, talking, fighting, and getting your reward. Then do the next quest and repeat. This can get tiresome, but if you scatter the requirements for the quests so that they will be unlocked in between deep skilling grinds, it can almost feel like a reward or a reason to take a break from skilling to enjoy other sides of the game. It's like eating your vegetables to have that delicious dessert at the end. But wow, is there a lot of vegetables. And while these skills can absolutely be improved to be less monotonous, that's a very controversial thing to do, and that's because of the people who stuck through it and managed to max these skills regardless of how difficult it was. What would buffing it or changing the way the skill is approached say about the skill? It could easily be devalued if more diverse high-level locations or skilling methods were added. Low-level areas or training methods are added frequently because those don't really matter as you're going to fly through those skills anyway, so even adding a training method that gives twice the amount of experience from level 1 through 25 would still be only a blip in your overall experience, and therefore a relatively accepted update in RuneScape. But let's say you add something in the higher levels that for the same amount of effort as any other high level training method gives 10% more experience, that would shave off a tremendous amount of time. Or if it's a purchasable skill, it's going to save you a load of money. So implementing new high level training methods can feel like it's creating something like a slippery slope. Like if you hit 99 woodcutting and shortly after several new trees are added for high level woodcutting, that cape would not only become more accessible, but instill the idea that as RuneScape progresses, more and more of these methods will be added, which is where I believe the term easyscape comes from. Why train a skill that you find tedious when you can just wait a year or two for a faster or cheaper training method to come out? Which is where a lot of the controversy comes from nearly every update that old school or RS3 might receive. The general thought process is, will this update really improve the quality of life and change something that seems unfair or even pointless into something reasonable and improve the overall experience of the game, like those stick traps all around Tiranoon, that no matter what agility level you are, you always seem to trigger, could instead be changed so that the success rate scales to your agility level and not seem as punishing. This could definitely be seen as quality of life. But something like changing the Wilderness Chaos Altar so that it gives the same amount of experience as a Gilded Altar and has the potential to save you 50% on prayer training under the circumstances that your deaths are kept to a minimum can be seen as easyscape. So it's really difficult to draw the line into what updates are deemed acceptable. On one side, you have players saying no updates are acceptable and RuneScape should revert back to its vanilla form, and others saying that nearly any update is passable, from something like small agility shortcuts to something meta-changing like infinite run energy. So it's hard to decide when an update should be implemented, which is something that both games struggle from. Well, actually, it's more like how it should be implemented. But first, what skill is theoretically the best for implementation, or maybe even overall? In terms of diversity and letting you craft your own experience, in RS3 it's probably invention because of how much of a supporting skill it is, and how discovering a cheap item that no one knows about can be insanely rewarding when it comes to training and crafting components. But what about old school? Well, we have these gathering skills that have many gathering locations and do offer a small variety of skilling styles depending if you want a fast or AFK-able experience, with the exception of farming, which is a skill that you can't brute force through. Although it is a gathering skill, it acts more like a daily activity like buying out staffs every couple hours, which is nice because it's a bit of a different gameplay loop. But still, most of these gathering skills aren't really that rewarding considering you can buy most of what you gather on the Grand Exchange. And in the case of farming, it's also kind of a consumable skill like smithing and crafting. These provide fast experience, but then again, many of them rely on you having a large sum of money to purchase supplies and don't offer much diversity and locations to skill at. With these, there's always an optimal area to train, whether it's near a bank near an anvil, or a bank near a stove. My point is, these rely on consistent banking and are mostly AFK, which is great for those that want that, but don't offer something for those that want to be actively playing the game. So probably not these. Okay, so what we're left with are combat skills. Melee skills are all trained the same way, and range is trained in a similar fashion. Attack monster, get XP. It works kind of the same way for magic, which can also be considered a consumable depending on your training method. I like these because unless you're trying to power level, they can be trained passively and you can almost forget you're training them when farming a low level NPC or a boss. They can definitely encourage exploration and form a larger part of RuneScape, which is PvP and PvM, but sadly there is no PvP skill in game. But there is one for PvM, which is where we get into Slayer. Slayer was added to RuneScape on January 25th, 2005. This skill stands out from most other skills because in reality it is a supporting skill. It doesn't add anything new to the game that couldn't have already been added without the Slayer level restriction, and that's why it's the best. It's not a skill that you can train linearly. It's one where you don't feel like you're losing out if you're not fighting the highest Slayer monster available to you, so you can't always be fighting the most efficient monster. Which means you won't be spending days grinding a skill near something like Barbarian Fishing, the Motherlode Mine, or even just a bank. It's a skill that forces diversity, but still gives you a choice. And like I mentioned before, this is something that especially in the lower levels rewards exploration. Okay, so let's say you just started playing RuneScape and you get a spider task. Well, you know that there are level 1 spiders in the basement of Lumbridge Castle, but people are always fighting those for some reason. So you explore, you go into the wilderness and find poisonous spiders. Well, they're poisonous and they're too high level, so you need to go somewhere else. You then go into Varrock sewers and find giant spiders, which are a perfect fit for your level and what you feel comfortable approaching. What I'm trying to get across is Slayer limits your options and forces you to fight monsters and explore areas that otherwise you wouldn't have known existed or even cared about. This, coupled with the Slayer store, which was added on June 5th, 2008, or December 12th, 2013 if you play old school, gives you even more freedom as now you can cancel or block tasks that you don't like. But this punishes you. If you were to skip a Steel Dragon task that costs 30 Slayer points, that isn't too bad, it's just one skip. But if you keep doing that and don't decide to even try them, now you have to multiply those points to how many more times you skip them while trying to get to 99 Slayer. and that adds up to a lot of points. Ideally, and what this skill is trying to do, is get you comfortable with all areas around RuneScape and most importantly, the combat system, as there are many tasks that can only be approached with a specific combat style, whether it be mage, range, or melee. Some are even hybrids that require more than one attack style, and that is a great aspect, as for the most part you can choose your loadout, experiment what's best for you in certain tasks, and also whether you want to sacrifice Slayer experience for a more AFK task or even challenge yourself with a boss task to get more points. There are so many options and different ways to approach Slayer, which is something you can't say about most other skills, and that's something else that's also really strong about it is it can be updated frequently and not throw the meta way off balance, and if my research is correct, it's currently the most updated skill in game. A great example of a recent update would have to be the Kebble's Lowlands, which along with many new Slayer creatures and a Slayer boss, also adds a new Slayer Master that brings an interesting twist to Slayer. This Slayer Master gives you a specific task that has to be done in a specific location, which might sound counterintuitive, but again, this Slayer Master is optional, and it encourages exploration. Also, monsters assigned by the Slayer Master have a unique drop, which is a Brimstone Key that can be used on a chest back in the Kebble's Lowlands that offers a variety of rewards. So if you're looking to get a Fire Giant task, why not sacrifice convenience a little bit and try to get one from the Slayer Master? I believe that this skill overall makes the entire skill grind a lot more bearable by having you constantly change locations and gear. It makes it more of an adventure instead of having the next training area you go to based on your level. Can you imagine if something like this was implemented for agility or even runecrafting, where a certain amount of labs gives you bonus experience and then you can move on to a different course or a different rune to craft without the feeling that you're missing out on experience because you're not doing the most efficient course? This, like Slayer, would allow these skills to be updated more frequently without the worry of ruining the skills by making it too easy. Just more bearable unless you find more bearable easy. These are the reasons I believe that Slayer is the best skill in terms of freshness, exploration, and diversity. This has been what makes Slayer so great. Goodbye and thank you for watching.